So that's how we give credence to the concept of destroying human groups, right? It is the destruction of the group that is the genome, right? The family, the tribe, the group, right? The destruction, the attempted destruction of the group is facilitated by the destruction of the individual. The destruction of the individual in and of him or herself is not relevant in a very crass sense, right? It's not relevant to the overall analysis of the crime of barbarity at this level of discussion, right? What we're interested in is specifically with the crime of barbarity, the destruction of racial, religious, or social groups is what he says, right? And the way that we go about destroying the whole group is by destroying the individual, but we're not going to focus our analysis on the destruction of the individual unless the destruction of the individual is because of his or her affiliation with the group, right? So now we have an even sort of stronger foundation behind the concept of genocide. Okay, so to move on, all right. Now there's an important sort of caveat that I want to bring up, and I think it's important to bring this up now. I'm not going to go into too much discussion on it because I'm currently working with these ideas, because I haven't really seen too much written by scholars regarding these two concepts that Lemkin introduces. Very few have written on the idea, and I think, you know, being a scholar, it's not about hoarding the knowledge, right? You know, I found something that a lot of people aren't writing about, so I'm going to hoard that idea and just keep it for myself. Rather, let's put the information out there. For those of you who are just general viewers, just want general information, well, you have a pretty high level of general information. For those of you that are researchers yourself or students, well, you have there's grounds for you to publish works and do stuff based on some of these ideas. I think that the information should be shared at all times. You know, it's not proprietary. This is academia. This is education. This is about sharing knowledge. Lincoln brings up a very interesting point, which I want to share, and I think it actually pertains to this foundational account in an attempt to understand genocide. Lincoln makes a distinction between two types of destruction. Remember, at this point in the game, we're not talking about genocide, right? These are the foundations for an understanding of genocide, right? So at this point, what we're talking about is destruction. And I'll write that down. Destruction of human groups. Right? So at this point, we're not talking about genocide. What we are talking about is the destruction of human groups, right? And we're going to talk about two types. Well, not me, he, Raphael Lemkin talks about two types of destruction, right? So he talks about two types of destruction. And I think this is actually really fascinating. Now, I might be, you know, it's a little nerdy to say that, but, you know, I actually do. I think it's a very fascinating idea, this idea of two types of destruction as sort of a precondition to an understanding of genocide. And I think his discussion on the two types of destruction, if we investigate that more, right, and we will in the subsequent lectures, we'll investigate this idea of the two forms of the two types of destruction in more detail. We'll have a very, very regimented, not regimented in a negative sense, right, because it is flexible in a sense, but a very, very thick, or very, very rich understanding of this idea of genocide, right? What we mean by genocide when we say genocide, right? The first form is what he calls direct destruction. Right? And he's very specific in this, right? He uses the term direct destruction, right? Direct destruction for Raphael Lemkin, and as I said, this hasn't really been discussed much in the literature, direct destruction is the result of military destruction, right? So it's a militarized destruction, right? So direct destruction results from military direct destruction results from military destructive capabilities, right? Military destructive capabilities. The military has a battalion. They use that battalion to kill selected members that have been targeted for destruction. Military destruction, very direct, right? We have a direct means of destruction. So that, for example, if we're talking about, remember, pre-genocide, we're talking about the attempt to destroy human groups, then one way that I might facilitate my desire, my intent of destroying this human group is by implementing a direct form of destruction. That direct form of destruction, according to Lumpkin, would unfold as a consequence of me using military groups or military regimes, military personnel to destroy these individuals. Later in other videos, I'm not going to do it now, we're even going to break down this section. I'm not going to do that now because this is introductory. It'd be a little too heady to sort of complicate this idea of direct destruction, but it can be deconstructed itself more, right, to more seminal, more basic ideas, right? So what we recognize is that Lemkin makes a distinction, obviously, between what he calls direct, and then obviously the next will be indirect. Right? Indirect destruction. For Lemkin makes the distinction between direct and indirect. We recognize that direct destruction is a result of sort of military capabilities. Indirect destruction, however, is not, right? And we'll talk about how it's indirect in nature. Lemkin classifies this as what's known as biological destruction. Both direct and indirect destruction as foundational concepts to the idea of genocide, right? Buttressing the idea of genocide, fortifying the idea of genocide. Both these concepts of direct and indirect destruction yield in the attempt to destroy human groups, right? So the idea of attempting to destroy human groups is a foundational account to the idea of genocide. Even more foundational to the idea of destroying human groups are two even more foundational accounts: direct destruction, indirect destruction. Direct destruction is the implementation of sort of militarized operation in the attempt to destroy human groups, to be technical, right? Indirect destruction is the result of biological destruction, which is an indirect form. So you can think of the act of forced abortion as indirect biological destruction. You can look at acts of euthanasia as enforced euthanasia. And I've done videos on euthanasia. If you want to see the different types of euthanasia, just watch those videos on euthanasia. But you can have sort of enforced euthanasia as one example of indirect biological destruction of human groups. You can have sterilization, right? You can have forced sterilization of men and women within the population, tubal ligation, vasectomies, and blah, 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 and so on and so on, right? All of these are indirect modes of destroying human groups. In the end, you have the destruction of a human group. So it should be understood then that if we're talking about, as an end, human groups, destruction of human groups, and I'll just abbreviate it DHG, right? The destruction of human groups, we can arrive at the destruction of human groups by two means, according to Lemkin. We can arrive at the destruction of human groups by directly destroying the group, using military force to attack and kill members of the group after they've obviously been targeted. Or two, what we can do is a more indirect means. We can destroy the group by using an indirect means of destruction. How do we do that? We enforce forced abortions. We implement policies of euthanasia. We start to euthanize the population. We start to sterilize the population. Nevertheless, obviously subsequent generations will not be able to contribute to the group, won't even exist, so we destroy the population, right? We destroy the human group. Either way, the human group is destroyed by either direct or indirect destruction. I think the idea, and I can't stress enough how very important the idea of destruction of human group is. And in contemporary genocide scholarship, I think as contemporary scholars, we need to reinvestigate these two concepts, right, of direct and indirect discussion, because I think we can make further delineations in what we mean by genocide when we're talking about genocide.